Welcome back to A Book Binger. My name's Shelby, and I am a girl who's binging a new book each week instead of binging Netflix. Let's get started on this week's book. If you haven't heard about Anchor by Spotify, it's the easiest way to make a podcast, with everything you need all in one place. Let me explain. Anchor has tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. When hosting on Anchor, you can distribute your podcast on listening platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, and more. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. And best of all, Anchor is totally free. Download the Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hello, fellow book lovers. Another week, another book. This week's book is recommended by Bridget. She is none other than my wonderful mother, my Lorelei to my Rory, and of course, a huge reason why I am deeply involved with books. She was so kind as to pass that gene towards me. She was dying to get on my podcast, or more likely, I was just trying to bribe her to get on my podcast. None other, she finally agreed, and she chose the book 1,000 White Women by Jim Fergus. I'm really excited because we have never read this book before, so we are going to have a fresh and unbiased conversation. Here's the book description. 1,000 White Women is the story of May Dodd and a colorful assembly of pioneer women who, under the direction of the U.S. government, traveled to the western prairies in 1875 to intermarry among the Cheyenne Indians. The covert and controversial Brides for Indians program, launched by the admission of Ulysses S. Grant, is intended to help assimilate the Indians into the white man's world. Toward that end, May and her friends embark upon an adventure of their lifetime. Jim Fergus has so vividly depicted the American West that it is as if these diaries are a capsule in time. Let's get started. Well, welcome, Mama, to my podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm super excited to talk about this book with you. It's been eating at my soul.
I know. It's been, what, now 3 weeks?
Well, you read it a lot faster than I did. I just finished it, but have been wanting to talk to you about it the entire duration, and it's been killing me.
Well, it took me probably a good week to read it because it's 482 pages.
Oh, yeah.
It's a lot. But from the time we started it was about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, that is true. That is true.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, we're just going to unleash everything that we've been holding back.
I hope I remember everything I wanted to say, because in the moment I was thinking, I got to tell Shelby this, how I feel about this. And
I know.
I didn't write it down or anything. I wish I would have.
Well, I started making notes, but then it was just getting longer and longer and longer.
Yeah.
And I was like, I got to stop.
It's like 6 pages.
I know. Okay. First off, my initial, moment of the book that I wanted to bring up was how messed up it was that May's family put her into this insane asylum.
Oh my gosh, right? Like right off the bat, we learn about May and how her family stuck her in an insane asylum in the late 1800s. So let's talk about that. Like, the insane asylums were just places to lock people up. They didn't receive any treatment. They were just put there for various reasons. And poor May, her family, her parents committed her to this awful, awful place.
Yeah. And it says it right here. She's like, why am I here? And the doctor says, why? Due to your promiscuous behavior. And she's like, but I'm in love. I have a family. Like, I have children.
Right. And like by today's standards, it wouldn't be considered promiscuous because it was one man and she lived with this man. She had 2 children with this man. It was only ever one man, but she didn't marry him. So they were living, I guess, in sin or whatever you would want to call it. But this man was also like below her economic status. Her family was
Mm.
rich and well-to-do and well-known in the city of Chicago, and she chose this like laborer man and fell in love with him, and they were not happy about it.
Right. She was the rebel of the family from the
She
start, she talked about too. And so this just made her dad even more pissed off.
Right? He's like, here, let's lock you up because I am tired of people talking about you and you actually being around. But then they took her children. So
Oh,
not only did they lock her up, they like took her children to live with them and raise them or whatever. And
yeah. And we don't even realize that that actually happened. That was just kind of the
it was like a
idea that
blip.
she had. Yeah. Well, and she's like, I don't know if they're like, my kids are actually with my family. Like, what did they do to them? Did they kill them? Did they take them? You know?
Right. And there's a question of whether or not her quote unquote husband
Oh,
was a part of them coming to take her away literally like in the middle of the night. And
right.
so she wondered, was he paid off? Did he know this happened?
Oh.
Like, what is going on? So anyway, I feel like we might be giving away too much, but
Well, you know what? If they've clicked on this podcast link, that just right off the bat tells them that there's going to be so many spoilers. So,
right. But yeah, so she was under the impression that he may have been paid off because in the end of their relationship, he was not faithful to her, and she was
mhm,
upset, and she was like, well, maybe, maybe
right.
this happened.
I kind of feel that way because he did say like he wanted to marry her and she wasn't the marrying type.
Right.
And that's really what tipped him off. And so I think maybe with that pent up anger, it did lead him to just be like, fine, take her away. Like, she's not mine anyway. I'll take the money.
And to give up his kids. I mean, and there's like
Yeah.
we're obviously all of these insinuations are our own. It doesn't say any of this in the book.
No, no, no.
We're just guessing that this is what this guy did and he kind of turned into a slime ball, but
Yeah,
read it and you decide.
exactly. Yes. Harry is the husband, or not the husband, but
I
the, yeah, I don't
the
know.
I don't know, the boyfriend, the lover man, the father of
Yeah,
her children, whatever. Yeah.
exactly. And I do think, though, it is sweet that she writes her letters out towards him at first because she is still
Yeah.
in love with him. She is the love of her life at this point, still continuing.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we need to say that the way this book is written are she writes letters to her family and then she writes journal entries about her life. So it's not a like traditionally written book. Some of the way it's read is a little bit as you get into reading it, but she's writing these letters to her family after she joins this program and she's making entries about her life. So it's all
Hmm.
coming from the perspective of May.
Yes. And this program that my mom talked about is a program where the government has agreed to give the Cheyenne Indians 1,000 white women as brides because they know that ultimately they're going to have to transition into the white man world. And they found that this is probably going to be the best scenario is to bring these white women to have their Cheyenne babies because traditionally the Cheyenne babies are brought up in the mother's tribe,
Right.
which I thought that was such a genius idea. Like that this chief Little Wolf of this specific tribe had come up with this idea because he knew ultimately that he wasn't going to be able to sustain this living lifestyle that he had. And that I think was the tipping point of like, okay, this is going to be a good book because he knows that he ultimately is going to be defeated in a way, but he is making up a positive conclusion and resolution to this.
He's trying to continue the Cheyenne bloodlines and way of life in a small way by
Yeah.
mingling with the white men, right? And it just makes me so sad that Chief Little Wolf has this foresight of seeing his people and their way of life basically being destroyed. And
Yeah.
so he's doing his best to try and preserve whatever tiny bit of that he possibly can. So he
Mm-hmm.
has a lot of wisdom in trying to figure out how to save his people.
Yeah. And then just right off the bat too, though, it just shows how kind of slimy the government was being towards them because
Okay, so the entire book, the government is slimy. And I
yeah.
know even when I was a kid, like growing up, we didn't know a lot about what happened to the Native Americans and the government and all the atrocities and horrible things. And this book sheds a little bit of light on that, obviously, from a fictional point of view.
Mhm.
But yeah, they were pretty terrible people.
They were like, sure, we'll send over those for 1,000 horses. And then they're like, well, we're not going to send our best women. We're going to send our nutto women.
Let's talk about that. Yes, please. So this is where they're getting their women. So they kind of asked for volunteers, but where they drew these volunteers were from prison and the insane asylum. So this is
Yeah.
how May signs up for the program is they come to the insane asylum. They kind of had like a shoddy screening process, if you want to
Oh,
call it
yeah.
that. And just basically, hey, are you fertile? Can you have babies? Do you like to camp? Basically.
Exactly.
Is what they
Yeah.
asked these women. And so they were like, yeah, sign me up. And she at that point in time, I think she would have signed up for
For
anything
anything.
to get
Mhm.
herself out of this situation because it does talk a little bit about the things that happened to her in that insane asylum, and she
Yeah.
is very much ready to get out.
Yeah. And I think it was a good thing for her to do because it just brought, I think, a little bit more hope into her life and clarification that she really wasn't insane.
Well, and I think the thing that she clung to the most was the promise of this program was that you go, you marry a Cheyenne, you have their baby, and then 2 years, you spend 2 years with the people and you get to go home free and clear. And
Yeah.
so it was all about getting back to her two babies. She's like,
Right.
if I do this, then I can go home to my other two children. That was
Yeah.
like her driving force, right?
That's right. Yeah, because she was so upset. Every single day she thought about them. And then after she writes to her lover, that's what most of these entries are to her kids. She starts
Yes.
writing them to them. And yeah, and even at the point when she knows like these journal entries really aren't going to get to her kids, she
Hmm.
still knows that this can be a article of my adventures. When I get to them, I can show them, like, look, your mom's really not insane, but this is what I did to get to you. And then it's
Right.
funny when she starts to put in, well, maybe your mom is a little insane for doing this.
Especially when she gets out there and she looks around and she's going, oh, wow. Yeah. Okay.
She's like, what
Yikes.
did I do?
What did we sign up for?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and these other women that she meets on her way out there, it's
Oh my
just kind of this
gosh.
modge podge of I don't know. I don't want to give away too much about the characters because the way it describes these women on this train as they're heading out to Cheyenne territory. Oh man, you just have to read it. I can't do it justice, but
No.
it is it's just like this crazy mix of women who are all thrown together with this commonality, and the way they become friends is kind of beautiful. I love that part of it. But
Yeah.
in the beginning you're going, "Oh, how is this going to work?
Oh
Oh
my
my
gosh.
goodness."
Well, I remember that was definitely the first point where you were like, I have to talk to
Yes.
you about this. I
I
was
did.
like,
Oh, so I texted Shelby because I was reading about these women and I was just thinking, oh my gosh, we have to talk about where these women came from and their personalities. And there was just such a mix. Like, so I got to talk about the Irish sisters, the
oh my
Irish
gosh.
Catholic redhead
The Kelly
sisters who came, the
sisters.
Kelly sisters come from prison, and they are like as rough and tumble as I imagine a woman being at this period of time.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
they are crass and they're like thieves and
Oh, totally.
they're just
Gamblers.
yeah, the way these characters are written, you just picture these girls as being terribly irreverent
Yes.
criminal type women. It was just
Uh,
funny.
oh my gosh. Yeah. So on this train, you had the Kelly sisters, and then you had a Scottish woman, you had a Canadian free black slave, You had
A very staunch religious woman who was there just to
yes.
convert the Cheyenne to Christianity.
Yes, she was no way there to have their babies, and she made that a matter of fact.
Very clear. She was not doing that.
And then there was, oh, of course, May's best friend Martha, who worked at the insane asylum and helped her to get here because she just wanted to find love. And she
Yeah,
wasn't pretty enough to find love where she was at.
right? Martha was lonely. She was
She
like,
was
why
so lonely, and she was so timid the entire time and so afraid.
not? And then I
Oh,
forget her name, but the lady who brings her dog, she brings Daisy.
oh my gosh.
Daisy Lovelace brings this tiny little dog, Fern Louise, and it's just like, why would you bring your dog? She's
Well,
so attached to this dog, and
yeah.
she's a southern belle.
Yes.
Like the Civil War destroyed her daddy and his plantation and the slaves, and so it goes into like her background as being a southern belle, and
Hmm.
yeah, so much about her.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Yeah. She is definitely a very important character in the
Her
book.
transformation is one of the most dramatic, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. For
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah. But the thing that I kept thinking was, why did they allow her to bring this dog?
Well, that's what I was like. Did she smuggle the dog, or do they just not care?
And that point they probably didn't care because she was a volunteer and they couldn't get very
Right.
many people
They're
because
they're trying to scrounge up as many women as they could.
exactly at the beginning, what, they only send them about 150 women, I think.
Yeah, if even that.
Well,
Like
that
this
was, I
little.
think, how many started out on the train, and then not even
Oh,
halfway through, a lot left, and then even like almost when they were there, more left. And so by the time they actually got there, I think there was only 25 women that
yeah.
actually were like, "No, we're committed. We're going to do this."
Well, and I think it's interesting that they asked for 1,000 white women, and this Femi is an African American freed slave from
Yes.
Canada. She's from Canada.
Yeah.
So, they were kind of grasping at straws to send women over to the Cheyenne, and she was one of
Hmm.
them.
Well, and especially Gertie, the Scottish woman.
Oh,
Like,
I love her so much.
she's not a white
Oh,
woman either. And so,
I
yeah,
think she's Swedish. She's Swedish.
Swedish,
Yes.
Scottish.
Swe-
There was something. It was something.
Swedish.
Yeah,
Very definitely. Yeah, she's Swedish.
Swedish.
But
Yeah.
she's huge, and she's not pretty, and
Oh
she
yeah.
couldn't ever find a man, and so she was just saying, this is my chance. I
Yeah.
I need a husband. This is how I'm going to get one because nobody else wants me, kind of thing. And
And she knew
really
she would
like
be a good
her.
wife.
Oh, I like her so much.
Yeah, she's a really good character. So, kind of fast forward. I guess. Well, and kind of also getting off the topic of the timeline of the book, was there a certain part of the book that you really enjoyed? Like it was your favorite part, or it was just something that really stood out to you?
I love when there's not very many times in the book, but I love when she stops to just contemplate her life in the moment. She's looking at the stars, or she's looking at the grass in the fields, or she's feeling the wind on her face, or, she's just kind of taking in this very quiet, serene lifestyle that she has chosen for this period in her life. And it's in those moments that I think she really realizes, like, there's a lot of talk about God and a higher power and all of those things. And I think those are her very spiritual moments, is
Mm-hmm.
when she takes just, and there's not very many in the book, but when she does that, I just felt like this was her time to meditate, and I just loved those parts of it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I don't think I put too much emphasis on those parts, but she does have them scattered about in her journals. And
Hmm.
she does take a lot of time to sit down and write about it too, instead of just letting the moment pass. So I think also in turn she can remember them.
Yes. And to share those with her kids, who she eventually wants to share these experiences with. But it's very, I don't know, it's just very peaceful to me when I was reading when she talked about those times of being in nature, like she'd never really been in nature. She comes from Chicago, which is this busy, gross, dirty city at that time. And she'd never even really been outside of it. And now she's in the middle of nature.
Yeah. And I think Jim, the author, he did such a really good job at describing the prairie. Like,
yes,
it was just in so much detail that you felt like he knew everything about it. Like he was there. And because the Cheyennes, they relied on nature. They didn't have erected homes. They had their teepees. They traveled all the time. And no matter where they were going, he could describe that place in so much detail. You just totally saw it.
The valleys and the rivers and the mountains and, all of those things. So while we're talking about the author real quick, let's talk about the fact that a man wrote a book about women and a woman from a first person perspective. There were a few times in the book when May was saying certain things or writing about certain things. And I thought, I wish I would have written it down, but I thought there is no way a woman would have wrote this or would have felt this or, I think he did a fairly decent job, but there were some times where I thought, okay, I can totally tell that a man is writing this book.
No, yeah. So to be frank, I honestly didn't pay too much attention to the author at the beginning. I just saw the title and jumped right in. Yeah. And I can't remember it exactly, but there was a point and I was like, wait, why would she say stuff like this? And then I realized, wait, a guy is writing this?
Right. And he did a fair job,
Yeah.
And I think he did do a good job, but there are some things that happen in the book that are very aggressive and violent and shocking. And definitely written, I felt like, from a man's perspective, these certain events that we don't need to talk about. But I just thought, okay, yeah, this is definitely like written by a man kind of thing.
Yeah. And just as a disclaimer, there are quite a bit of sexual scenes in this book that we had not anticipated at all.
I had to apologize to my daughter that I recommended this book. And I don't know if I would say, so there's not like a number of them. There's not very many, like numerically. There's maybe 2 or 3 that are just very detailed and shocking.
I feel like there might have been a little bit more though. Like
more than that?
Yeah, I feel like there was quite a bit because if you think about the premise of this book, it's these women trying to have Cheyenne babies. So
right. Well, and you know what? That's a good point because she goes into the insane asylum for her being promiscuous. The point of marrying these men is to have their babies. She meets a soldier man on her journey to meet her Cheyenne husband, and there's some stuff attached to him. You know what? You might be right. But it's not like laced throughout the book, but the times that it does talk about it are graphic, I guess, with not in like a 50 Shades of Grey kind of graphic, but like, I don't know, it's so hard to explain.
Yeah, and it's graphic for sure, but I think also it kind of at the beginning, obviously you're like, okay, she has this lover, that's fine, but then when she starts getting towards these Cheyenne ways, then it's like, whoa, okay, why is this
right?
What is going on? Like,
well, and I think for anybody who listens to this podcast before they read the book, if there's any type of triggers or anything in your life, it depicts rape more than once.
Absolutely.
So if that's something that is not in your wheelhouse, you don't want to read about those things aren't healthy for you to read about, skip this book, because I can think of 3 times that it depicts rape.
Well, and there's a very big scene in the middle of the book that is
very,
I did skip through a lot of that because it was, I feel like And that's kind of where also I feel like the author, his male perspective really did kind of dominate that, because
Yes.
I don't think as a woman they would have spent too much time on this particular rape scene, which
Correct.
included multiple women of the tribes.
Correct.
And yeah, so that was probably the one section where I really skipped probably a couple pages, because it just didn't, I don't feel like there was any I just didn't do anything for the book later on. It didn't have any importance. Like there wasn't something specific in it.
Right.
Know.
I feel like that could have been eliminated, or at least, at the very least, described differently, shorter. I don't know.
Oh, for sure shortened. Yeah. I think he took way too much time into that. And also a certain character of the tribe, I'm blanking on his name now.
Oh, Jules.
Jules, yes.
Jules Seminole, or however you say his name, nasty little man.
Oh, I think that was definitely also another perspective where his real life gender brought out a lot of aggression. And so I feel like even that character, he probably could have been eliminated. I know it brought into the fact of there is a very holy purpose of not killing somebody, even if they're in a different tribe.
Correct.
But I don't feel like that was as important as bringing in this really disgusting character.
Well, and I feel like we needed a nemesis in the book to come full circle for what happens at the end, right?
Right.
Because he's the guy who was leading the end, who...
That's true.
Right?
Yes.
But I feel like it could have been done a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think for me, that's probably a big thing I didn't like in the book, is that the author brought in some crude, repulsive, and pretty graphic things in a couple of parts of the book. Again, this is a pretty long book. It's almost 500 pages. So there's a lot going on. And when I say these things, it's not like it's every other chapter there's something going on.
It's kind of spattered throughout, right?
Yeah.
There's no really huge sections on it. It's not in every single journal entry or chapter, however, you want to say that. But I do want to talk a little bit about the way the author depicts, for lack of a better term, like the savagery of the Native Americans.
Oh, yeah.
And there are some of these things that he writes about that are 1,000,000% like super savage. How could a human being on this earth do this thing? And I'm not sure I agree totally with his point of view on that.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point.
I'm sure there... of course, I didn't live there. I don't know a ton about the history of the Native Americans, but I do know there was a lot of war. I do know there was a lot of bloodshed. I do know those kinds of things. But there's one particular thing in the book. I don't even know if we need to talk about it because it's so horrifying. So maybe we don't need to go into the details.
Yeah.
But it's towards the end, and it's so horrifying. And I'd already felt this way about the way he kind of depicted the savages. I thought, I don't think it was that extreme. And then he goes into this event, and I was just thinking, what in the world? Why would you write this? I kind of want to go back and see if there's any historical significance to this event and if it was true on any level, because I was so horrified. It was insane.
Yeah, that particular instance at the end, if you go and you do read this book, you will 100% know what we are talking about.
Oh, yes. Once you get to it, you'll know, oh, yep, that's what they were talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that one was horrifying. I think also, though, in turn, we have to remember that this is a point of the view of white privileged Southerners, too.
Correct. So, but even so, without going into it, I can't believe any human being, no matter what tribe, no matter what animosity, no matter what enemy you had, that you would do this. So I will
Mhm.
go ahead and say that it does involve children. And so even on that level, to do this to children is just like, would they really have done that? What was
Right.
that something that was real? So I kind
Yeah.
of want to see if I can research that once I'm over like the shock of it.
That's
Um,
a yeah, that's a good point too. I guess the specifics of how he described it. I think more so as it's like throughout the book, when they're talking about how savage they are. I
mhm.
feel like that is a good depiction because that was what they were brought up to think. I mean, that's how they thought about the black slaves too. You know, they didn't think that these people were really people. And so
Right.
that's how they felt about the Cheyenne Indians. But then, yeah, I can see what you're talking about. If you go to their traditions and if you actually pay attention to how he's describing their movements, their ways of life, really, if they were that way. Because at this point, yeah, they had interacted with civilization. They had some tools, they had utensils, they had clothing from some trade posts. Like they had dabbled into what it was like to be in a
Right.
modern world.
Right.
So it probably, now that I'm thinking about it, he probably did go a little bit too far in that description of what it would have been like realistically. But again, this is,
Right.
a fictional interpretation.
And on the flip side, I want to give him a little bit of credit because the way that he talks about their families and the way they
Yeah.
support each other and their community and the way they take care of each other and the way they just 100% welcomed these women into their tribe.
Right.
And there was a little animosity between some of the wives because we're talking, there was a polygamous relationship. So he had several wives and then he brings in another one. And but the beauty of the way they took care of each other
Yeah.
and the way everything worked and everybody was fed and nobody lacked for anything. And they just welcomed these women open arms, and there was a purpose for it. And their chief was like, yeah, we're doing this and all of those good things. But the way they just worked as a people and as a community, I think he did a really good job.
Yes, you do have to give him credit for that, especially once they do come over that hump of that initial shock. It
Right?
is pretty sweet. It feels like sometimes I even forgot that it was a polygamous family because they just kind of had this like old grandmother and kind of sisterly bond towards May.
Yes, and they loved her. They ended
Hmm.
up loving her and embracing her
And
and
protecting her.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely protecting her. And so I loved that part of it. The
Yeah.
the cooperation of the tribe and the community and this nasty character Jules that we talked about is actually a Cheyenne, a member of another tribe. And so it was against Cheyenne law to kill a member of the Cheyenne tribe, no matter whether they were a part of yours or somebody else's. They kind of had different war parties. It didn't matter. You just didn't kill anyone of your own tribe, no matter what.
Mhm.
And so that
Yeah.
kind of becomes important later on. But yeah, that guy was just a piece of work. So even
Yeah.
even when there were people within your family or your group that probably deserved to not be around anymore, you couldn't take care of that. It
Yeah.
was such a cooperative system that they had going on.
I know. Yeah. Yeah. He did a really good job at describing these tribes, their traditions, their families. He, even if he didn't really do a whole lot of research, but I feel like he did. I read a little bit up on him, and he did quite a bit of research because he's a journalist.
Right.
At at the beginning of his career, but he did really just he had throughout the book he had a really good knack for describing places, people, situations. He is an excellent author in that perspective of his writing is really, really good. You can just picture yourself being there. And that was something that, I mean, I read this book really quickly because it was just easy for me. to
Right.
understand.
Right. Yeah, he's a good storyteller, and the way that it's written, from the perspective of May and a journal entry kind of thing, it there's not a lot of room for things to get lost in a lot of wordy dialogue. Like,
Yeah.
and sometimes one journal entry ends and another begins, and she's telling a whole new story,
Hmm.
basically saying, "Oh my gosh, a week has passed and you will never believe what happened. This is what happened."
Yeah.
So, sometimes I feel like I'm reading a book and there's so much that gets lost. I forget stuff that kind of happened before. And I didn't feel like this book did that.
Yeah.
Like the way he transitions is pretty good through from journal entry to journal entry. There's not a lot of filler stuff.
Yeah, and I really did like that style of writing because it's not common. There are a few books that I know of and have read that kind of try to emulate that, but it's not the whole book being
Right.
a journal entry, which this one is. It's an entire novel that is based off of journal entries. And then when her journal entries end, it's the journal entries of people who either knew her or were after her, you know. So I thought that was very interesting that he incorporated that into
Yeah.
his entire book.
Yeah, we get to see. So, when May's entries end, it kind of picks up at the end. We get to hear the rest of the story from somebody else who kind of adds to the end of her journals for May's ancestors. So it comes full circle. It starts with an ancestor, a descendant from May's family. This man who was like, okay, we don't know much about this woman. What happened to her? And the saying was that she'd run off to live with the Indians, but they took that as being that she had gone crazy and went to live in a mental institution. And so on this journey that he takes to find out what really happens to her, he understands so much more the phrase that the family has adopted, that she's gone off, run off to live with the Indians. It was legitimate. It
Yeah.
actually happened. He's like, oh, okay, well, so that's a real thing. And then it comes full circle to him finding these journal entries and going on this journey of his own to find out more about May. And I
Mhm.
loved that part, like
Yeah.
ancestry, genealogy, finding out where you come from, finding about your ancestors. I love that part.
Yeah, and that was something that I love too because I think family history is important. And I think in this day and age where technology is readily available, there have been so many people who I know that have really embraced that fact and they look for their ancestors. And in a lot of situations, you can find things that your ancestors have written down and that have been recorded and
Right?
kept. And I thought that was a really cool addition to this book because not only was it a fun read of a story, but it did have that aspect of like, it's not just because we're exploring the life of this one person, but it's because we're delving into her genealogy and her posterity.
And he truly wanted to know more about her and what had
Yeah,
happened to her and why nobody spoke of her. And, she was this mystery woman. And so it was, and it's just kind of a testament to like, leave something behind for your ancestors. I know this is all fiction and everything, but like it can totally be applied to real life.
absolutely, for
Um,
sure.
but I wanted to ask you, like, who was your favorite character overall?
See, that's a hard one because I for sure loved May because she was strong, she was courageous, but then there was a lot of times where she was, I think, too ambitious and it kind of annoyed me.
Yes. I think she was a little too feminist for her time, even more like
Yes.
even a feminist in that period of time would not have been nearly over the top like she was.
Right. Yeah. There was a lot of times where she interjected too much,
Right.
and that was then annoying. But kind of like a love-hate relationship with her. I think I really drew upon her courage and her strength for sure because she wasn't actually insane. This was her character, her motive.
Right. And I related to her as a mother. Like
Yeah.
everything she did was to get back to her children. And so I kept remembering that as she was doing these things, thinking, okay, I can relate to that. I understand that.
Yeah. And honestly, I did love Gertie.
Oh,
Like,
thank you. She was my favorite.
I think I just loved her so much because she was like, I'm here just to make a good situation for myself out of all the crap that I've been through. And even though this isn't ideal, I'm going to be happy with it.
Yes. So Dirty Gertie,
Yes.
it was my favorite. We kind of brushed, like we talked last week or whatever about characters. And I said, I cannot wait to tell you who my favorite character is. And I got to tell you, so her nickname is Dirty Gertie. She lives on the plains. She actually lived with the Cheyenne for a time because she was kidnapped by them as a child. But for a long time, she was masquerading as a man. So she could go on these wagon trains and live the life on the plains because women weren't allowed to. And I love her. I just love her simplicity and her plainness and her loyalty and the way she just stuck herself out there for the captain, who we haven't even talked about, and I can't stand him and I don't want to talk about him. She kind of works for this captain at a fort, and she just does everything and anything for him. Whatever he asks of her, she goes and she does it. And I loved her character so much. And she's not even in the book more than 2 or 3 times.
3 times total she's in the book.
Yeah, she's like this passing character in the night, but every time she pops up, I was like, yay, Gertie's back.
She's definitely like a savior in a lot of these. I mean, because when she comes into the book, she kind of is there for a majority of the time that she's mentioned. So it's not just like in passing really quickly.
Right.
This was just this kind of character. But yeah, she's kind of like what would you call it? A connection to the outside world, really, for May.
And absolutely. Yeah. May gets to be real close with her in the short amounts of time that she has spent with her. And I think they have this relationship where they kind of relate to each other. And it is that connection for May to the civilized world when she sees her. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I feel like we could just seriously talk about this entire book. And I think we need to give our listeners a chance to go read it for themselves and then to even tell us what they think. Because again, I didn't realize how big of a book it is. It's almost 500 pages. So there is a lot that goes into it. You guys need to go out and get it. 1,000 White Women by Jim Fergus. It is a long read, but there is a lot of stuff that goes on. Overall, I think there is all of those sexual instances. There is a lot of talk about racism, about slavery. So there are some of these topics that can be hard to read about or talk about.
Right.
Again, disclaimer, if that's not what you feel comfortable with, don't go and read it.
Right.
But I think it's still just a good read in general if you're looking for something new, if you're looking for something different. This is a good one to pick up.
Well, and just in conclusion, I have a love-hate relationship with this book. There are parts that I absolutely loved and I loved reading. And then there were parts where I thought, I hate this. Why am I still reading this? I cannot believe, like, I'm not going to finish this book. And then I'd get into a part that I loved again. So it's definitely a love-hate for me.
Yes. Yep. So go ahead, guys. Let us know if you're going to pick up this book. If you finish it, if you liked it, if you hated it. We have so much more to say. But we're going to leave it at this. So thanks again for listening to this week's episode. There you have it. Bridget and I discussed the book 1,000 White Women. If you're interested in reading it, please go ahead and let us know what your thoughts are after you've done so. Also, don't forget to subscribe. We have a new episode each week, as well as if you have a book you'd like to recommend, please go ahead and message me. I'd love to get you on this podcast. Visit our social media platforms on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks again for listening, and tune in next week where we will have another podcaster on our podcast. I'm super excited for this one. Thanks again, and this is just a girl binging books instead of Netflix.